So has anybody ever heard of those experiments?
Yeah.
Which ones?
All of them except for the one that revolved around the orphans.
The monster study. So you guys are kind of familiar with it. So we've had a lot of growing pains that really taught us to do better. And so the Belmont Report is really the basis of all the ethical standards in which many of the social sciences and behavioral studies, programs, disciplines, what have you, base their code of ethics on. So for the purposes of this class, of course, we base our code of ethics on the Code of Ethics of the American Anthropological Association. And there are a few responsibilities outlined within its code. And so the responsibilities, there's 4 that I want you guys to really pay attention to. And that is, to those we study, we have a responsibility to those we study, to scholarship and science, to the public, and to students and trainees. Now, I'm saying this right now, but why is it important for you guys to know what the ethical responsibilities are of researchers to students and trainees? That's right. It applies to you guys. You need to be held accountable. And you need to hold others accountable within this. If you ever find yourself in a position where there is a violation of these particular responsibilities a researcher or teacher or your mentor has towards you, knowing what they are so you could recognize them is your responsibility. And so that you will never find yourself in a situation where your academic integrity is in question. So the responsibility to those we study, what is it? Our primary concern must be to the welfare of those we work with. And that means there's 4 other primary things that we have to consider within that. And they are to do no harm, give anonymity and recognition, and I'll go into these in more depth too. We must obtain informed consent. Because like in Little Albert, the mother didn't even know really, like she didn't even really consent to the actual study. And that there are problems within that. We'll kind of get into it. And 4, to be transparent. So, to those we study, in order for anthropologists and researchers alike, we have an ethical obligation to the people that we're studying, the species that we're studying, and the material that we're studying. And that also we do not apply any harm towards the people that we're working with at any point. And this is because we're really kind of dependent on the kindness of strangers. If you ever become an anthropologist, which I'm sure you guys are in this class just for this specific reason, but I mean, if you ever find yourself in a new situation, how many of you ever find yourself kind of at the mercy of the kindness of strangers, you know? Whenever you're in a new university setting, right? What are you dependent on? Sometimes it's your peers to help you along. Sometimes it's the authority figure. Sometimes, you know, it's your dorm mates. It's whoever it is that you're finding yourself interacting with. That while they may not be your best friend right at the time, they may become your friend. They may become a different type of relationship. And that depending on those various different degrees, you do have an obligation to those relationships. And as researchers, you have an obligation to those relationships that may potentially form from the kindness of strangers. So you need to make sure that those things are protected, you know? Also to those we study, our obligation to the people we interact with supersedes our obligation to science. There is no reason to be like, for the sake of science, it is okay to harm the well-being of another individual or person just so that we know more about what it would do. And that would include, of course, making sure that they're safe at all times, right? So it's safer for me to send you guys off to do an ethnographic study than it would be to send you off to do one in a physical space, right? That is part of my obligation as a researcher to make sure that you guys are kept safe. But as you go into this, whenever you think of this, and it's going to be one of those challenges, how is it that you are keeping yourself safe and others safe as you're observing a microculture, right? Let's go back to the mycology example. If I know that there are some morel mushrooms that are growing in some space, and I tell that person that I socially interact with in a virtual setting that, hey, if you go out there, but it's on private property, and we know that, it could potentially compromise the safety of that individual. I don't know about you guys, but I do know some farmers that do not take kindly to trespassers. And what do farmers have? Shotguns. There we go. So it could be they were mistaken during hunting season or something like that. You got to kind of always predict potential outcomes in which you may put someone in harm's way and be responsible over it. Also, to do no harm, we always will respect a human being's right to dignity, right? There is always the right to human dignity. And when that becomes compromised, you do have an ethical responsibility to recognize that and ameliorate that situation to the best of your abilities. You don't always get to be Superman, of course, as I'm doing these metaphors with Stan Lee, but you would do your best to not place somebody's right to human dignity in a compromising situation, right? And then also privacy. If somebody is everybody has a right to privacy. That is something that we value as a culture, as people. If somebody goes in rummaging through your stuff, there is a sense of violation to that. And so always respect the right to privacy, which kind of bleeds into the next concept, give anonymity and recognition. And when we say that for researchers, if your subjects or the people that are providing you with information are like, hey, I would rather be anonymous, that they don't really want their name to be put out there, give them a pseudonym, but also give them the comfort emotionally to know that the information that they provide to you can still be protected under that anonymity. And in stark contrast, at the opposite end of the spectrum, if somebody wants to receive recognition for providing you that information, provide that recognition. And also in your final reports, you will have an acknowledgement section. So whoever you're working with, if it is suited for your particular study, you can provide recognition for them in that particular stance. So we should always make every effort to ensure and comply with your informant's wishes or the people that you're studying's wishes. So, informed consent. This is a bit tricky, right? Because on a social media platform, sometimes you don't really need consent to join, right? Some you do. I don't know, how popular Facebook is, but I know in my generation there's still Facebooking going on, but there's sites sometimes that you have to adhere to the administrators' rules and guidelines. And you got to apply, and then it has all those types of things where it really wants you to respect the rules of the site, right? And so sometimes if you have that opportunity to talk with somebody that is an administrator or anything like that, let them know what you're doing, There is no reason to do this where we're going undercover. We're not undercover investigators or anything like that. We're just researching, So we should obtain informed consent in advance, if possible, if applicable. Provide information on what you're doing. So always be very clear. Be like, hey, I'm doing this for a school project. I'm doing this, and this is kind of what we're needing to get done. Always use me as an excuse if it makes it easier to convey what it is that you're doing. Okay. What you're going to do with that information? Well, you're writing an ethnographic report. You're writing a report about the social interactions of people to turn in for the purposes of the course. So that's a pretty easy one. And you can obtain this in written consent or oral consent, or especially if you're typing, if it's on a virtual platform, you could type it up or you can screenshot it, however you need to. We got a lot of resources and tools to be able to use that kind of thing for it. If you do have questions and are kind of like, well, how am I going to apply this to this particular microculture that I'm studying, just ask me and we can come up with ideas together, okay? Transparency. Transparency is researchers should not manipulate or exploit the groups that we are researching. There is no reason to try to capitalize off of somebody's time and life. This is just normal social interaction, and there is an ethical duty that we have to respecting that. Researchers should recognize the debt that we owe to these groups, because we will never be able to give back as much as we get with the information from our observations. Oh my gosh, it's out of control. This thing has a ghost in it. And so one of the next ones that we have a responsibility to science and scholarship. And that just means we need to anticipate some of the ethical issues. Engage in this honest scholarship where we're not fabricating information or making things up. The preservation of sites. This is one that's also it's kind of hard to translate this one in a virtual setting. Don't try to destroy your virtual site. We'll say that, okay? And also share your results and your data. We don't try to keep things secret. This is stuff that should be disseminated. Information should be shared. Anticipate ethical issues. So expect to encounter ethical dilemmas at every stage of your work. Oh man, look at it going. Okay, so make good faith efforts to try to identify what they would be before you would get started, but it's going to also happen along the way. You may find yourself ethically compromised, and you'll have to become flexible and really try to do what you can to mitigate those issues. We kind of thought about this with ethnographic assignment 2. You looked for various challenges or things that could kind of arise and kind of explored it. You'll probably be exploring it a little bit more, a little bit further. Try to identify any ways in which you would find challenges in applying the ethical standards to your sites as you're kind of going through all of your ethnographic assignments, okay? But we also, as researchers in the professional setting, are held accountable to these standards through the international or the institutional review board or the IRB. So anyone who receives funding, because yes, that's how researchers often get paid to do these kinds of things, you get funding, you have to have a review board to keep you accountable and keep you to that ethical standard that was laid out in the Belmont Report. And they must continuously monitor and review biomedical and behavioral research involving human beings. Okay, and I'm seeing that I have roughly about 2 minutes before we start wrestling up any papers or anything like that. Know that this is probably going to bleed over into Wednesday's lecture, and I'll just pick up from there. For the quiz that will have to happen, I guess it will just be one quiz for the week. I'll try to figure that out. I'll give you guys a heads up and the announcements for how I'm going to translate that. We'll see kind of what happens with it. And then also all the information and instructions that you will need to know about your ethnographic assignment 3 are available to you in the ethnographic and associated assignments section. So read through that very carefully. Read your journal assignment carefully. And also, you'll have a chance to kind of discuss the Belmont report in more detail through the forum. So you can post to the forum. It'll have a set of questions, and just make sure to do that. Do you guys have any questions? Yes.
It's not pertaining to this, but as I was reading your syllabus, it asked to ask you, where did you live in Australia?
Oh crap, I thought I took that out semesters ago. Where did I live, or what did I live in? Okay, so while I lived in Australia, I lived in a tent on the beaches of Australia because it was easier for me to pack up and traverse the continent that way. Yeah, I lived in a tent for 2 years in Australia. So, dang, all right, you get a prize. I'll figure out what that is. I thought I took that out. Darn it. All right, darn templates. Anyways, you guys, any more questions? Yes?
Are we going to be able to see the PowerPoint too?
Yes. Yes. I'll try to just post up the PowerPoints and sync up the audio, and I'll announce how that's going to kind of proceed for the rest of the week, okay? In my mind, I always finish these. In application, not so much. So I'll let you guys know, okay? Any other questions? Great. All right. See you guys next time.